are picking up some background noise. If you're able to mute your line or move to a quieter area, please.
Okay, sorry.
Good evening. We'll call the meeting to order. Louder every next time. I'm humble. For not seeing everyone. Oh, I got over. He's a little weak tonight. Roll call, please.
We're commencing with an oral roll call vote. Commissioner Hamilton?
Present.
Commissioner Grunsky?
Present.
Commissioner Midgley?
Present.
Commissioner Rustaller? We have Commissioner Rustaller is absent. Commissioner Songa?
I'm here.
That concludes roll call.
Welcome. Thank you. We have minutes from January 6th and January 20th of 22. Questions? If not, a motion for approval.
I make a motion that we approve the minutes.
Seconded.
Have a motion second. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Songa?
Yes.
Commissioner Rustaller is absent. Commissioner Midgley?
Yes.
Commissioner Grunsky?
Yes.
Commissioner Hamilton?
Yes. Motion passes 4-0 for both. Are there any action requests for continuance withdrawals? Thank you. At this time, the public is welcome to address the Planning Commission on items of interest to the public that are not listed on the agenda. Comments to the Commission are limited to a maximum of 5 minutes or 2 minutes. Crowd, does anyone want to bring anything up?
Your opportunity, if you're connecting to us remotely, to speak and address the Planning Commission for any items that are not currently on the agenda for this evening. I'm seeing no online participation.
All right, seeing none, we'll move to action item. Action item number 1, development title update workshop.
I see some of us were green, but, Juanita's wearing green, but I don't know if that was on purpose. So tonight we have our consultants that we've been working with for the last 2 years, Michael Diet with Diet and Bhatia. He's our consultant that we've been working with closely. Update on this development title. On the 1st of March, we had our first supposed to be kind of like a run through on some of the questions we may have come up tonight. Opportunity for people to do it online as well as having. We do expect there to be, staff has even noticed title that we do want to change. So please all comments tonight on things you like to see, didn't cover, etc. Mr. Diet's going to go ahead and give us a presentation, and then we'll open it up for comments. Back in the future by year and seeing what kind of comments.
Welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. It's a pleasure to be here to again talk with you about what we've been doing. Last time it was on the streamlining, and we've moved ahead, and today I'll, again, for the purpose of those who may be listening in, just give a brief overview of the overall purpose and then run through the main components of the title, the base zones, the subdivision and infrastructure sections, the additional regulations that are in place, and then talk with you a bit about the general plan and zoning map amendments. And Jennifer will follow up with a bit more on the next steps. And we like to have your comments and comments from anyone that may be here tonight and want to speak as well. So the objective are really several-fold. Most importantly, to carry out the direction in the general plan and make sure we're consistent with state law. We were also really charged with streamlining the process, which I spoke with you about when I was last here, and need to make sure that the zoning map is aligned with the land use plan so that those uses that are planned have the appropriate zoning in place. And there were some technical amendments that are needed with the general plan as we went through the whole title update to make sure that it's consistent with the new development title. And we've been involving stakeholders, we've been having interviews, we've met with you, we've briefed all the board aides, and want to make sure that this update really reflects what San Joaquin elected, appointed officials, and the community want. And the key issues that were outlined for us in the beginning are that the permitting is fairly cumbersome, that there really hadn't been enough attention paid to agricultural industry and agritourism, that some of the problematic uses like truck parking and the short-term rentals hadn't really been adequately addressed. We were asked to look at renewable energy, your great resource here in the valley. What can we do to make it easier to put solar and wind in place? And of course, the housing needs, affordable housing needs, need to be part of the update, and we spent a fair amount of time on that and aligning those regulations with what Sacramento sends down to the counties to implement. The zoning framework that was in place in the development title is really sound, and it's largely carried forward. As I mentioned, there will be some adjustments to the zoning map. Only one zone, base zone, is recommended for deletion. That's the agricultural resource management. It's not really needed for general plan implementation, so let's clean up that part. We also looked carefully at the land use regulations, the schedule of allowable uses or uses that need a use permit. And there are many new businesses that are now in place in the county that you couldn't find on the list. So it was important to update those. And some of the terms on the list weren't really plain English. You know, I'd see type 2 communication services. Well, what does that mean? Well, why don't we just call it a cell tower and antennas? You know, so we've tried to introduce plain English, make it much more usable and friendly for everyone to find out. And we've streamlined the permitting process. I mentioned this last time, that there'll be permitted uses, uses that require that the project meets standards. Those also can be an over-the-counter approval. And then you would delegate authority to a zoning administrator to handle the small use permits. We call those administrative use permits, and keep the major projects that need a use permit at the commission level, and those are still called conditional use permits. And all the tables now have an additional column on the right side that tells you what the additional regulations are, so that when someone's looking at it, they'll be, if they're looking at it electronically, there will be a hyperlink. They can click on it and know right away in one place what all the rules and procedures are from this one table. We added clarifications for accessory and temporary uses and have an administrative process so that they can be tracked much more easily. The zoning administrator will do some of these through an administrative use permit. The temporary use permit provisions, which are new, would likewise be a staff level process. And this streamlines the permitting process, but the tables are all clear and everyone knows what the rules are. The second part of base zones are the physical development standards. Where does the building go on a lot? And no major changes in what's happening, so we haven't created nonconformities, but we have added some new standards on what you can do in the setbacks, how you could reduce your yards, where the parking should be handled in the setbacks, you know, so that there's cars aren't overhanging sidewalks. And then what happens when the more intensive uses are next to single-family neighborhoods? We call those transitional standards. We've added an important idea I think makes sense in the multifamily areas, which is to have outdoor living area on decks or balconies. And they need to have enough space so you can go out in a chair with a table and read a book or have a little sandwich. And that's why they're minimum dimensions. These are the same tables that similar to what you saw with the land use regulations, but they have diagrams. So there'll be no misunderstanding about where a specific standard applies to a plan or an elevation. And this table, coupled with the land use tables, are really the heart of the new base zone regulations. We've added opportunities for 3 new types of housing: the bungalow court, the small single unit, and the townhouse. And this will allow for a more compact, affordable development. And you may approve smaller lots down to 2,400 square feet, for example, if you find that they'll fit in to the neighborhoods and meet the housing market needs. It's a discretionary action on your part, but we thought it was a really good option to allow for those kinds of small lot subdivisions. The other thing that Sacramento said all jurisdictions have to do is allow in the single family zones, the RL zone, 2 units on a standard lot. This only applies in those areas that are adjacent to the incorporated cities. And it doesn't apply in the hazard areas or other problem areas or to certain types of housing. And there's some restrictions that apply. You can't do these 2 units and then have an Airbnb kind of rental, nor can you exceed, we put a combined square footage in of 2,400 feet because we don't want large structures overwhelming the neighbors. And that's why we also have a 25-foot height limit, 1 parking space. And all of these rules then, if they're met, means you can get an over-counter approval. That's called a ministerial approval. This is the map. You can see it's only in selected areas of the county based on the census tract definition of urban fringe. We consolidated all of the existing standards and added some new standards for specific uses so that they're in one place. And they address the potentially problematic uses or uses that have standards set by state law, the accessory dwelling units, the renewable energy, and their approval criteria that have to be met if appropriate. And just by way of example, we fleshed out the short-term rental issue so people understand what they have to do. They have to get a business license. They have to occupy the home where they're offering the rental. But we didn't restrict the number of days, and unless this becomes a problem, that's probably not necessary. Biomass conversion is something many farmers would like to do, and now we say this is fine. It's an accessory use if you're just doing it for your on-site needs. Otherwise, you need a use permit from the commission. For convenience stores, we set some standards on height, on size, and setbacks. Home occupations, we've opened them up. What we've all learned, COVID, working from home, let's be a little more generous about what we can do and, in fact, allow someone to have an employee. That just makes good sense today. But continue to prohibit or restrict certain occupations that might create a problem in the neighborhood and have no outdoor storage. Similarly, with wind and solar, we try to really say what are the standards if you want to do something small scale. That's an over-the-counter permitted use. But if it's a larger scale use, then it requires a use permit. We call utility scale, and that would be something that would come before you. The standards in both cases, we look to peer counties to see what everyone's doing, make sure that you're just as progressive as others. And if these energy facilities are abandoned, they have to have a way to decommission them, to get the old abandoned structures off the site and put it back to a usable condition. Agritourism is, I think, an exciting new idea that allows people to come and have agricultural experiences, farm and barn tours, to even stay overnight in a farm stay or a home stay with food service and not have the limitations that we imposed with the bed and breakfast, and allow more off-site marketing and directional signage, just like the wineries have. And I think the farming community should really like these new agritourism regulations. We spent a fair amount of time with the state laws and with the Public Works Department to make sure that all of the provisions for subdivisions and infrastructure are up to date. But we wanted to streamline the administrative process, calling out distinctions between parcel maps and final maps, making sure all the standards are up to date and the financing options are clearly laid out. And we had to allow for urban lot splits in those areas I showed you on the map so that they could divide those into two urban lots and put the homes on. And that's, again, another Sacramento rule followed. The current process is largely maintained, but now we call out a name, temporary subdivisions, vesting tentative subdivisions, which give people certain rights. The minor subdivisions are also called parcel maps. That's usually the normal term in most communities. And there's a new chapter on administration and common procedures so that you're looking only in one place at how you go through and get the approvals. You'll see an emphasis on required findings. That's an important theme in this update, that you have to find that the approval meets the criteria of the title. It's not just something that, oh, you think this is a good project. It's a good project because it follows the standards. And we specifically allow for concurrent processing. This is, again, part of that streamlining I'd mentioned earlier. Dedications and reservations are another, I think, important part of the update. And I've always thought of this as, kind of the heart of the subdivision process, because that's where you get the public facilities in place, the schools and parks. And we've added detail about these and standards for parkland dedication to make it much clearer for the subdivider to know how much land he has to set aside for parks and not have to do a case-by-case calculation to determine the park acreage. But we're also allowing a subdivider who feels they have a unique project and it won't have the same occupancy requirements to come in and present their case for a different type of parkland dedication. This is the table, and you could see we lay out, based on the census, assumptions about how many people will live in the single-family unit, the multifamily unit, or the mobile home. And from those calculations, you then get the per acres of parkland that has to be set out. And this is a far easier table than having to go through and write a report and do some analysis, because you just multiply that fraction over on the right-hand side times your acreage, and you know your parkland. For roadways, again, pulled together all of the existing standards, made sure they fit with the classifications in the general plan. And one of the new ideas in the general plan is to create complete streets, meaning there's land for the cars and trucks, but also land for bikeways and for pedestrians. So they're sharing the overall right-of-way. Well, that meant you add sidewalk standards and you add rules for bikeways, either bike paths or on-street bike lanes. So you create in that street cross-section the expectation to accommodate all those modes. We did some other fine-tuning with Public Works, and I'm very grateful for all their help on getting this chapter up to date, allowing for deferred improvement agreements, allowing for alternative design and improvement standards, clarifying the right-of-way widths, pedestrian widths, making sure that we accommodate the needs of the Americans for Disabilities Act, and saying, sure, you can put in alleys if you want, but they're at your cost. They have to be private. The county doesn't want to get into the business of maintaining alleys. Development impact fees is another important area where we did some streamlining. We have to follow the new rules in the Mitigation Fee Act. And what's important here is that we've simplified the reporting. If there already been work done on an impact fee, they don't have to pay for a new nexus report. There has to always be that reasonable relationship. Does the fee cover the impacts associated with that off-site or on-site improvements? And that's back to the findings. But we wanted to streamline that process. We've clarified what the county surveyor does, what the director of public works does, and their improvement plans are really now labeled public improvement plans, because that's the idea, that they're to produce the public improvements. And there were some technical edits to a number of the other sections to just clean them up and make sure they all work together. I'd mentioned earlier infrastructure financing. Well, we wanted to be very clear that the county would allow someone to come in under the Mello-Roos Act and present a community facilities district, or they can use what's called the 1911 Improvement Act provisions to, again, create an instrument, a special district that will then be used to fund the improvements. And there can be deferred improvement agreements, expansion of existing districts, and rules on accepting the improvements. So I think this all lays out a much cleaner process for the subdividers to follow. Deleted that supplemental water fee. It's just not needed with everything else that's going to be in place. You won't see major substantive changes in the next section, the master plans, special purpose plans, and specific plans. But we've introduced, again, that idea of required findings to make sure that the plans meet all the standards laid out, and that it's clear you can impose conditions of approval. If it's not quite up to what you want, you'll approve it conditionally if they make certain changes. You can recover all the costs of plan preparation. There's a streamlined one-step process, and we're clear that the specific plans are administered as required by the government code. That also hadn't been laid out in the existing title. I mentioned the streamlining process. For plan development, what this means is first offer it to any type of development, not just residential. Why couldn't a commercial or an industrial or mixed-use project do a plan development? Makes sense to me. And why have them go through a two-step process? If they know what they want, they've worked out the details with county staff, come in, ask for the approval from the commission, and then if you find that it's adequate, you give it to them. And we've separated the rezoning with a PD approval of what they want to do from the PD plan itself. And the PD plan is really approved through a conditional use permit, and you administer the PD plan. It doesn't go to the board and then have to be administered by the board. It stays at the commission level, the PD plan. The rezoning, of course, goes to the board. That's a legislative action. And, I should have mentioned, and there are no separate design standards now in the PD provision. Someone has to come forward and present their best case. It doesn't make any sense to have two sets of design standards. You have the design standards that you want in the base districts. Someone wants a change. It's up to them to tell you why that change makes sense. And a lot of the design guidelines for residential just are good practice, but let's not create a two-tier system. Let's put all those ideas, if they make sense, in the base zones, which is what we did. We've consolidated the site regulation, so again, it has a logical arrangement. It deals with all of the things that affect building, siting, and planning, and all the provisions that are now sprinkled in various parts of the code relating to refuse collection, green cans, solar energy, swimming pools, undergrounding. All that's now in one place, arranged alphabetically, so it's easy to follow. Affordable housing is largely what you have in place, but Sacramento made some changes. They extended some time periods. They added provisions so the disabled veterans can get a housing density bonus, transitional youth, homeless persons, and students. You can also offer a density bonus for child care, land donations if someone gives the county land for community facilities, or condo conversions. And lastly, in the high-density areas, instead of giving a bonus on a per-unit count, we can just add square footage, and the subdivider can decide whether he wants to create market rate family units, 2 or 3, let's say, for 5,000 feet, or he wants to do more studio units because he feels that that's the market. Let's not presuppose we know what the market is. Give him a floor area bonus and let him decide how to cut it up amongst the units. Landscaping, in practice, the county already uses the state's model ordinance for water efficient landscaping, but it's not codified. So that was an important thing to do here, is to put in place the basic requirements that are in this model ordinance, establish the idea of water budgets that are intended to use water much more efficiently, and write out what the documentation requirements are. The details are still in the model ordinance, so it's a fairly tight section, and it's streamlined for small projects. They don't have to produce all the documentation that a large project would. We've included rules for buffering parking lots, turf areas. We want to minimize use of lawns, and that will save water. Express a native plant preference. We want trees in, creating urban forestry. And we want people to think about how they maintain the system, the post-irrigation scheduling and reporting. Lighting's another important subject. You don't want light trespass where people have, unshielded bulbs that shine over the fence. So we express these basic principles: prohibition of direct glare. All lighting is shielded or fully shielded. And we have exemptions for certain types of use. Obviously, the emergency lighting, solar-powered lighting, and the swimming pool lighting. And flexibility for the sports facilities, outdoor sales, and gas stations, so they can have taller structures. In noise, followed largely what you have in place, but added an important idea that's in the general plan, which is that there are community noise standards based on land use. Residential areas have a certain decibel limit that is not the same as in non-residential areas. And we've streamlined when the acoustical studies are to be required and what they should produce. So it's not just, an administrative exercise. And we've lowered the noise limit for single-family areas inside to 60 dB rather than 65, because that's what people want. They want quiet neighborhoods. And the interior limit, 45, applies in the bedrooms where you're sleeping at night, not in all sections of the house. So this is some cost savings for the development community, but the idea is to try and keep the noise levels down both outside and inside where you're sleeping. And this will reduce the compliance costs, as I mentioned. For non-conforming uses that don't meet the current standards or structures that don't meet the development standards, we've organized the provisions in a more logical way and related them back to land use compatibility so that their criteria for replacement of non-conforming structures, they must be less detrimental. And you allow someone to come in and get their status as a conforming use to be defined. And so they'd get a letter out and avoid that misunderstanding about whether particularly this is important with a sale. Are the buildings that you're selling all conforming structures? Well, a new owner would like to know that. For parking, we want to make it right size. We don't want to ask people to have to produce parking spaces that are always going to be unused. And that's why we spent some time looking at the specific requirements for the individual uses and thought about how it's important to allow for shared parking, common area parking, and credit for both on-street spaces and off-site parking that you may provide. And when we looked at the stall sizes, they can be reduced a little bit, about 10%, to match what the sizes are in the current vehicle fleet. Well, that means a 10% reduction in your parking costs. So I think the development community would like that as well. We've added detail on required landscaping, so they may save a little money on the stall size, but have to put some trees and buffer landscaping in. And we've added requirements for the truck parking and the bike parking and stalls for both short-term and long-term use. And if someone has an alternative concept that may not meet the standards and the charts in the development title, the county can say yes to it if it's a well-conceived alternative parking plan. I always like to balance the need for clear standards with opportunities for some flexibility. So you'll see that in a number of places in the development title. Performance standards largely follow what you have in place today, meet the requirements of valley air, deal with electrical disturbance, heat, odor, vibration, and the zoning administrator has the authority to determine compliance. This will allow for some flexibility, again, at the counter level. We lay out all the supplemental standards that you currently have, arrange them in a logical way. As I mentioned, you've got the new agritourism provisions in, some expansion on grading and excavation based on what peer counties are doing, because we're really very light on that one topic. And a number of the other provisions are going to largely follow from what you now have in place. And we had been working with Public Works. It's not in this current draft, but we've got the flood hazards all lined up, all ready to go, and they're all updated, and that's well in hand. Spent some time with wireless communications. We all have our cell phones. We know how important this is. There's something called the 5th generation 5G, these small cell towers, smaller cells. And it's important that you have the rules laid out. A lot of these can come in under a streamlined permitting process that Sacramento and Washington said has to be followed. And that's if they're co-located. They share an existing facility. So we've expanded the exemptions. We've created a 3-tier permitting system. We've expanded the development standards so you're sure to have them protected. They're not going to be eyesores and visual problems. And that's why there's also going to be a standard conditions of approval in place. I mentioned at the beginning that there was some fine-tuning of the general plan, some amendments that are intended to help streamline the process and avoid unnecessary costs. So we adjusted the minimum lot size, for example, and density, so it lines up with the development title. If you're having 5,000 square foot lots, that really means you're having 8 lots per acre. So take away the 6, put in 8, that's the right adjustment. Recognize accessory dwelling units as the new term of art, not second unit development. And eliminate the square footage requirements in neighborhood and community commercial. That seemed fairly arbitrary, in the same way that we wanted to reduce the minimum lot size in rural service commercial, but if to 1 acre, but if they need on-site water and sewer, it has to be 2 acres or more, and EHD has to sign off. We reduced the minimum lot size in commercial recreation, adjusted the building size that could be built, took the coverage standard out. That seems an unnecessary restriction. And why just allow only one corner of an intersection to be developed in Crossroads Commercial? Let each corner have that opportunity. It just seems fair to me. And warehouse industrial had its own zone, which should have its own general plan designation. The other adjustments, we're putting in farm-related housing, making sure the Williamson Act size limits are up, so you're really protecting substantial acreage and fixing that floor area ratio for the agricultural industry, because what you're doing there is allowing development on 1 acre sites, so why not let them have a decent sized building on the 1 acre site? And the 0.01 floor area ratio just was very restrictive. And we've included a consistency table so there's no misunderstanding about what zones line up with which general plan categories. The map changes we spent a lot of time with. We overlaid the zoning on the existing general plan and looked visually at all those sheets to see where it wasn't lined up. And there was some rezoning that just wasn't done when the general plan was adopted several years ago. And the most significant change is from AG 40 to AU 20. There's some areas where we put in place the commercial and industrial zoning that's called for in the general plan element. And the packet that we made, and people can take, it's out in the foyer, lists all the parcels that would be affected, the current zoning, the new zoning, and the maps show what the changes are. And it's pretty straightforward. This does not deal with landowner requests based on projects. Those will continue to be handled by the staff on a case-by-case and come to you as individual requests. These are really map amendments to align the map with the general plan land use diagram. Well, that's been kind of a whirlwind tour of this. This is the same thing I'd mentioned earlier, all of the areas that are affected. It's a fairly small portion of the total county, but I think it's important to a lot of people and will reduce their costs because they won't have to come through and pay for those individual changes. Let's get the map all lined up. They will have to pay for their landowner request for a general plan amendment, but this, I think, will make a lot of people happy that they're getting the zoning that they'd expected. Back to you, Jennifer. My whirlwind tour is finished.
To Chair Hamilton, how you would like to handle this, however you want to handle taking comments, providing comments.
I would say questions, comments. I just have one question. Short time a year ago, labor housing availability.
Right.
Restrictions going to be.
Well, we did say we got two types of farm worker housing, and if you meet those standards, it's going to be as of right. And I think that the section on the farm worker housing will make it much easier to build those. And I don't have all this is a big document, but if you were within those limitations, I think for 35 units for the group housing and the other, then you can come forward. And it recognizes that the needs for farm worker housing are different than they used to be, where you used to have a bunkhouse because you had a lot of singles who doing that kind of labor, but today they're families, there's some women involved in farm workers, so the housing has a different profile, and I think we've tried to address that in that section. The county had asked for some state assistance on a farm worker design manual, and if that state assistance comes through, you'll have that as well. But for the title, this title, I think if you look at that, it will make things easier to get that housing produced.
Yeah, on the ADUs, we've already approved those, and those got approved by the supervisors as well. Is that correct? Then we approved here, and then for the ADUs, the accessory dwelling units, can we vote on that?
Through the chair, if I might add. So Michael and one of our former employees worked together to kind of separate that out to meet the immediate requirements that went into effect January of 20, I believe it was, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, they did that and they separated it out from this process. However, we've noticed that there are some issues with it. So we are planning on doing a pretty comprehensive overhaul on the ADU ordinance. The general idea is that we would like to make it a bit more permissive for this county, not quite so restrictive on size, things like that. So we are still looking at it, and it will come back to you again for approval as part of this document.
But my memory's not crazy.
You're not.
Okay,
Nope,
so we did some.
not crazy.
My question is this: how many ADUs have been built in this county since?
We have a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, people are really taking
It's working?
advantage of it. It is working. One other thing, I don't know if Michael touched on this during this meeting. He may have brought it up probably when we brought the ADU ordinance to you originally. But one of the things that we are working on is having a wide variety of types of plans that will be available to the public. They are still in the process of being put together, and they're not quite ready to the public, but very soon. They're going to be a variety of types of housing. So it will be from very affordable and very basic. We're actually borrowing some of the units, some of the design from the city of Stockton, which is actually a common practice that I didn't realize, is that other jurisdictions look at other jurisdictions and kind of, steal with with some permission. But we're going to have about 6 plans available for the public. So what that would do is allow people to not have to go spend money on their own plans, and they'd be plan checked already, and it would be a much quicker, more streamlined building permit and cheaper process.
That's good that people are doing it. And you were talking about the high density. There was a high density lot situation there. I think it was 2,400 square feet.
Yes.
Is that something that is by discretion, or that comes to us, or is that something that is an actual zoning?
There are 2 aspects of Senate Bill 9 that are not discretionary. The first is you have to allow 2 units on a lot. The second is you have to allow that lot to be divided in half, and no part can be smaller than 40% of the overall lot. So they're roughly to be the same size. That said, you can add additional restrictions. The lots could be as small as 1,500 square feet, but that is only in relation to, if the larger lot then would have to be, 4,000 feet to fit that 40% rule. So we followed the state standards, but added what I mentioned earlier, an overall square footage limit. So there's a minimum right to do 800 feet on the subdivided lots, but we thought it would be good to have a maximum combined square footage of 2,400, so it could be, 2 1,200s, for example, so 2 double wides. Because if you think about this happening in a single-family neighborhood, you don't want 2 monster houses coming in and creating it. So we thought that some tempering of it, because one of the objectives of the bill was to create opportunities for lower cost affordable housing. And so the idea of a cap on the size seemed reasonable, and a cap on the maximum height. But probably half or 2/3 of the language in those 2 sections is spelled out by the bill in Sacramento. We didn't have a lot of flexibility in writing up those 2 provisions.
Okay, thank you.
Barry, you have any comments?
No, I'm impressed. And I like the rewording, some of the rewording and making it more simple to read.
Thank you.
That was great. Yeah, I think it's going to be really helpful.
The only thing I guess I'd add is, we go through a major process like this, and we've been talking with staff, and this is a major new document, and people may find things over the next 6 months after the board acts, and so they'll be coming back and fine-tuning it. And I think that Corinne had mentioned that the staff is going to be looking at that fine-tuning and not just let the problems fester and not fix them for 5 or 10 years. And many jurisdictions do that kind of fine-tuning. They say, this is a major thing. We think we got it all right, but we might come back in 6 months because we found one thing didn't quite work the way you want. But I'm gratified to hear your comments. We worked very hard on this with, and I'm very thankful for the county staff's help.
When will it be finalized?
I have to go to Jennifer. I finalize things as soon as I'm given marching orders.
Recently, we've determined that we probably need a little bit more time to fine tune it. Michael's absolutely correct. We do plan on doing kind of a 6-month check-in to see if there are some issues that have come up. They always do, and usually they end up written in the side of the margin for our development title, but we don't want those to become the new norm with the notes. We would like to actually make the changes, not have those there for 20 years, the notes in the margin. So I think we are going to need a little bit more time. I kind of said in the beginning, we may even come back one more time to kind of show you some more things that we might be changing. So best case scenario would be the end of the fiscal year, which would be June. And then if we need to go beyond that, it would likely be by worst case scenario, end of the year of 2022. But we are very short-staffed right now, very busy, but this is a major priority for us. It affects a lot of people. We're very excited. Staff is very excited about having this done because this is the code we're using right now is 30 years old. There are a lot of things that did not exist 30 years ago that we have to try to figure out on a daily basis. So this is definitely a huge priority for us.
I might be part of the problem is I literally today sent 2 more things. So as legislation changes, it is just really, really this living, breathing thing. And then even once we get it developed, we'll look at that 6 months. Right. So.
Can you give me an example of the agritourism, what you're changing there? I just got a little confused. How would that look like in a real scenario with the food service, I think?
The agritourism?
Yes.
Well, what it means in real life is if you have a farm and you've got some extra bedrooms, a large farm, and you want to, and you're proud of what you're doing in the barns or out in the fields, so you can say, we'll have a barn tour, and you don't need, it's something you can do as of right now. We're being clear, and you don't have to go in and discuss with this is a temporary event or you need a special permit. This is all by right to do those 2 things. And if you'd like people to be able to come for the night and you'll cook them some, do a barbecue and have fresh vegetables that have been grilled, that's fine. And if you were doing this under the bed and breakfast rules, there'd be limitations. You don't have those same limitations here. And lastly, you can put signs up, just like the wineries get to do signage. So we're trying to set out some reasonable rules that are what we call by right. So that makes, to me, eminent sense, and the Farm Bureau can get the word out to its members saying these are things you can do. In other counties in the foothills do this, up in Napa and Sonoma, they do this. The farmers like it. It's a little additional source of income. It's a great way to showcase products. There certainly are people around Lodi or elsewhere in the county that are very proud of what they're doing, and why not let them invite people in and see what's happening?
Yeah, I would wonder in a different time how it kind of go over. You could see it kind of being abused, but right now it's like with fertilizer prices the way they are, I got to think every farmer would be up for any alternative income.
Yes.
Really, it's right, Commissioner Hamilton, Chair Hamilton?
Yeah, and then there's a balance there to keep your neighbor happy at the same time.
Yeah.
We can't say, yeah, we're going to have a barn tour and the limited number is 300 people for Saturday night.
So there were limitations. If you look at the details, I did have some numerical limitations.
Limitations program with the...
So we're trying to strike that balance, but offer an opportunity for farmers to do that. And I know that, when my family has done those kinds of things elsewhere, it's been really fun. When my son was growing up, it was terrific to introduce him to things that he may not know about living, in the San Francisco Bay Area.
That can make you have a better sense of where you're from for sure, and learn more about, the ag industry locally that maybe you wouldn't have a chance to otherwise. The final thing was on the intersection, the corner intersection thing. Can you give me a real world example of that?
For the crossroads?
What is it? Was the intersection where each corner?
Well, the way the rule is written in the general plan today is only one corner can be developed. So whoever gets in first, and they may only do, let's say, a gas station or a small store, the other three owners lose out under the current general plan.
But when you buy the corner, you better buy the right corner.
And I think that there's a rule that the lawyers always remind me, and I've taken on it: equally situated properties should be equally treated. And that's a fundamental principle in land use law. And that general plan policy, I don't think, was fair to it. It gave the first person in who got a permit whatever the value of their project, but why are the other three intersections not equally treated? That's what led us to this amendment.
Yeah, that was a really good catch. I didn't understand that. I mean, believe it or not, I don't read the development title every night before I go to bed. But that's very interesting. That I didn't realize it was just one corner. I'd never.
That's the way the general plan was written, and we want to fix it.
Yeah, that's cool.
That was one of the 30-year-olds. Okay.
The old general plan, but I do think that that does make a lot of sense. The Crossroads commercial is intended to provide services for people who live out of the urban areas, and so there's definitely a need for some services out there, and more than just a gas station.
Any other questions or comments? Or anyone would like to calling in for comment?
I had a question.
Okay. Go ahead.
May I?
Yes.
Okay. So I like it. It's very consolidated and simple, but sir, I had a question about the 1191, the deferred fees and all that you were talking about. Could you please explain a little bit?
I don't understand the question.
I think she referenced section 1191, what she said, but off the top of my head, I'm not familiar with what that is. So, Commissioner, if you could give us just a minute, we'll look it up.
Well, 1191 is not our numbering system, so I'm a little confused.
Do you have a different way to describe the section you're looking at, Commissioner?
Well, our sections are numbered in the series, 100 series, 200 series, 300 going to 900. So we don't have an 1100. We stop at 900. Okay. Now, Maureen, maybe you have the existing title available, but I don't have the existing title with me. I brought the new title.
You want me to?
Yeah.
That's Commissioner Sangha. That's you, correct?
Pardon me?
Is that Commissioner Sangha speaking?
That's me.
It is. Okay. What is the topic that you are looking at, so we can find what section you want us to look at?
We were talking about some deferred.
Okay, we're confused.
Payments or deferred improvements. Okay, maybe because I'm on the phone, I didn't hear it right. That's why I was trying to ask it. Maybe it's 911 or...
I'm sorry, I think we're having a little bit of an issue understanding through the phone what section it is. If you're on MS Teams, maybe you can send information through the chat function, if that's possible.
If it's the 1100 series, we have the improvement plans. We call them now public improvement plans. If it's a question about flood hazards, which we had a placeholder, we've worked out the flood hazard update. That's all in place. I'm not sure what else I can add to that because I don't know the specific existing section that you're asking a question about? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I don't know how else to answer your question,
No
Commissioner.
worries. I will.
You're welcome to email Corinne with your question, and we would be happy to get you an answer.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Anyone else call in for a question?
Is there anyone else who's participating virtually that would like to ask questions or comments about the development title update? Give your opportunity to address the commission. I'm seeing no other participants.
Is there anyone in the audience have a question or comment? Seeing none, thank you much. Appreciate
Thank you.
for all your hard work.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, move on to other business. Modification revocation request for UP 3009 of Manteca Sportsman Incorporated.
Pardon me. We have Principal Planner Corinne King is going to give a brief report about the request.
Good evening. So the Community Development Department is requesting that the Planning Commission initiate an action to revoke or modify use permit number UP 3009 issued to the Manteca Sportsman Club for the operation of a gun range and related activities located at 30261 South Airport Way in Manteca. Use permit was approved on August 6th of 1964, and the club has operated the gun range and the property consistently since approval. The use permit does not include any conditions that address the safe operation of the gun range and related activities. In February of 2022, the San Joaquin County Sheriff's Department conducted an investigation and found that ammunition from the club landed outside of the gun range property, including up to 1 mile away on the grounds of the Durham Ferry Outdoor Education Center and the historic Durham Ferry Academy, which is a charter school. A meeting was set up and attended by representatives of the Sheriff's Department, Community Development Department, the Sportsman's Club, and the Office of Education. During this meeting, all attendees agreed that they wanted to avoid any dangers created by ammunition leaving the gun range property, while also allowing the club to continue to operate in a safe manner. The operators of the Sportsman's Club have also entered into a compliance agreement with the county and have agreed to limit uses of rifles on site, to have a certified range master present, and to submit modifications to the language of the approved land use permit to the county. So the department is requesting that the Planning Commission initiate an action to revoke or modify the use permit number UP 3009 pursuant to Development Title Section 9-230.3 and direct staff to work with the Manteca Sportsman's Club with input from the Sheriff's Department and bring back proposed modifications to the conditions of approval that will ensure that the permitted gun range and related activities on the property do not pose a danger.
You're looking for a modification?
We are looking for you to direct us to now work with the Outdoor Sportsman's Club and the Sheriff's Department to work on modifications to the conditions of approval, which then we will bring back to you for approval.
Are they operating currently?
Yes, yes.
So they're just with the same, with no modifications right now?
They're operating right now. They have entered into a compliance agreement with us to stop operation of that portion of the rifle range, but they can do the other activities on site. But we've put kind of a pause on that section of the rifle range until we come up with some modified conditions to assure all of the above.
Is there any guidance from the Sheriff's Department on what they would like to see in this particular?
So, in addition to Principal Planner is explaining, I just thought I would jump in. The compliance agreement does include terms that were the Sheriff's Office assisted in formulating. So we worked with the club as well as input from the Sheriff's Office on the terms of the compliance agreement. So that compliance agreement is in place now. The club was cooperative, worked with us really closely, and in fact did stop operation of the rifle range when asked by the sheriff, and then has continued to stop operation of that particular range under the terms of the compliance agreement, which was, like I said, done in conjunction with the Sheriff's Office. So that's their limited use right now. They're complying with those terms, and what they've done is, and there is a representative here from the club, what your action would do would allow that compliance agreement to stay in place while they work with an expert on designing gun range operational and physical modifications that would ensure that safety element, which really would ensure that the activity, the ammunition stays on the project site. So they're working on that. The compliance agreement allows that to be safe operation during the time of the workup for those conditions, and then that's what would come back to you. So I did want to make it really clear, just that limited operation right now the Sheriff's Office has signed off and believes is a safe level of operation.
Looking for a motion on the compliance to stay in the compliant.
I think as Principal Planner stated it really well, that the code requires for any modification or revocation, and that's the name of the section, it requires an action by the Planning Commission, which does in fact require a motion and a vote. So what staff is specifically asking for you to do is to direct staff to initiate an action by motion and vote to direct staff to work cooperatively with the Sportsman Club with input from the Sheriff's Department to bring back a proposal for modifications to the conditions of approval for the use permit. And you don't have to include all of these words, but I'm just being really clear about what's being asked for, to be explicit. And those modifications to the conditions of approval do need to integrate physical and operational requirements that ensure that operates safely. That's your expectation of what you expect staff to bring back to you. That's what we've recommended to you for a motion and action. That's consistent with the code requirements for that type of revision.
Comments? We have a representative from the club that would like to speak. Come forward to the microphone if you would, please, and state your name and address, please.
My name is Anthony Abbott. I live at 5874 North Alpine Road in Stockton, California. I apologize for my casual dress. I wasn't aware until about, I don't know, hour and a half ago that I'd be present tonight, and figured it was more important to be on time than be well dressed. I'm here to answer any questions. I can give you a status of where we are right now if you'd like that.
Please.
The compliance agreement that Ms. Merrill refers to, the effective date of that was March 9th. We've been working on it for a week or two. We finally got the final signature on that on the 9th. We have 90 days to come back with a plan. I beg to differ a little bit. We talked to Lieutenant Johnson and said, what do you want to see? And basically we said, well, that's on you folks. So the ball's in our court. We're aware of it. We have our board on Tuesday night approved the retention of an expert. It's a very small niche industry, design of outdoor ranges, as you might imagine. But this person that we are prepared to hire, we haven't inked a consulting agreement yet, apparently grew up in this area, has worked with the Stanislaus County Sheriff's Department doing similar type of work, and we're cautiously optimistic he's going to give us some good ideas. But in terms of what the specific physical and operational changes are that we're going to come up with, that's we're very much at the beginning of that process. So we don't know where that's going to end up, but obviously the objective is that our range is as safe as it can be. Outside of the folks at the school, nobody has a greater interest than we in making sure that we can stay in business.
Questions? Great. Thank you for your comments.
If I may, through the chair, I do want to clarify. Lieutenant Johnson specifically looked at the terms of the compliance agreement, though, and did indicate that that particular operation was safe. In regards to the future expectations for the conditions, right, that's been put on the club to propose, which is pretty standard for any kind of development project.
I have no argument with what Merrill said, Ms. Merrill said. And I understand that Lieutenant Johnson doesn't want to be our designer. Am I excused?
You're excused. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. I can have a motion.
So on the motion, I'm looking at the conclusion here of how to word this thing because it seems kind of sensitive. I believe I could say everything instead of the action to revoke. I could just use the modify terms and just read the whole thing. Would that work for a motion? Okay. You guys made it simple for me on purpose is what I'm
That'll work fine. Thank you, Commissioner.
Doesn't that look okay?
All said and done. And ideally, we hire this expert. I'm going to want to ask Ms. Merrill for the name of whoever it is at the Planning Commission that expert's going to be working with most closely to develop a concept which is likely to fly.
Okay.
And through the chair, what we'll do is we will be connecting the club, Mr. Abbott, with planning staff. So that'll be worked through essentially just like any other planning application. But of course, they won't have to apply for an application, so there won't be an application fee, but we'll assign a planner to that so that there's a review, a step-by-step review, similar to any time somebody applies for an initial application. So that's absolutely the expectation. It wouldn't be a planning commissioner. It will be a staff level that will work through. There will be a full staff report, a full analysis of the proposals, and that'll come through to you for your review.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion that the Planning Commission initiate an action to modify the use permit pursuant to County Development Title Section 923.3 and direct staff to work with the Manteca Sportsman Club and input from the Sheriff's Department to bring back proposed modifications to the conditions of approval that integrate physical and operational requirements that ensure that the allowed gun ranges and related activities on the property do not pose a danger to the public, including but not limited to the attendees and staff of the Education Center.
Have a second? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Midgley?
Yes.
We have Commissioner Rusaller is absent. Commissioner Grunsky?
Yes.
Commissioner Songa?
Yes.
Commissioner Hamilton?
Yes. Motion passes 4-0. Thank you. At this time, any planning commissioner comments?
Redirect you back to number 2, relocation of the planning commission venue. Director Kwong would like a formal motion made so that we can take the information back to county administrator's office, general services, et cetera, so that we can request the money and the location move from the Board of Supervisors.
Said number 2.
Yes, it's number 2 under action items. We had the development title workshop, planning commission venue, and then the modification.
All I have is director's report.
Oh. Okay, I'm sorry if you have a different version of what we have.
Change it up on us.
Would you like me to just summarize what we would request from you?
Sure.
I don't know if you want to have a conversation. I'll leave that up to you.
Hey, we're here.
I believe Director Kwong touched on it last time we were here, and we were given basically a $110,000 estimate for the infrastructure for all the technological improvements that would be needed at the Ag Center. On top of that, we will have some additional costs for security, but we're looking at like $4,000 to $5,000 a year. We'll have a little bit of a rental cost. Those are not super significant. The biggest ask is the $110,000 to make the improvements down there. So if that's the pleasure of the commission, then we would just ask for you to direct us to ask for that.
Question for you.
Yes.
110,000. I understand through, talked to a gentleman from the IT department. This is for the ag building.
Correct.
Kind of an upgrade for the whole ag building. It's not necessarily the 110,000 earmarked just for planning commission meetings. Correct?
It would be.
Because it's going to be used.
Yeah, my understanding is it'll come out of Community Development Department's budget, but that it would be open for other people to utilize as well. That is my understanding, correct?
Quite a bit, so it's not turned off.
Oh, no, absolutely
Not
not.
only going to be turned on only for the days of the planning.
Correct,
So
that is correct.
that 110 is spread out. Mark for the planning commission.
I believe the purpose of the request will still be for purposes of the Planning Commission meeting, but I do not believe that there's any kind of restriction that would be put on to prohibit anyone else from using it. That would be up to the Ag Center.
And then does community development pay a fee for here, this building?
We do not currently pay any sort of like a rental fee. I do believe we pay for, is it IT? Pay for you? I always confuse either we pay for security or we pay for IT. We pay for one of those. The other one's included.
Request for,
I believe that if you are ready for a motion, if you just read what number 2, well, actually, I'll give you my copy if you, if you don't have it.
I have.
But it would basically be a vote to request that the board spend that kind of money to relocate them. Oh,
I would like to talk about it a little bit. I not an agreement to spend all that money when we have a facility we can already use. It's very nice. I don't feel more secure out at the Ag Center than coming here. I know I park in the garage, but even if I didn't, that could be because I'm used to coming down. But I might be.
Well, I'm the one that brought it up originally. It started out in health department, moved over here. COVID after we're here. Our taxpayer participation dropped off to nothing. I've had conversations with taxpayers out in my district saying, I'd love to come to the meeting, but I don't feel good coming downtown at night. And so we don't get that conversation from our constituents, pro or con, one way or another.
Well, we have had people come.
Well, not what I'm saying is we have people come, but you don't have them come like they used to. There was projects where you'd have people in my district don't feel comfortable. They have to park outside or in the garage.
Like a long walk.
And $110,000 over.
Yeah, I don't have a problem at all with kicking it up to the higher powers. If they want to shoot it down, they can shoot it down, especially if you're improving a building that does get used. I think there's some validity to both your guys' points, but I do think there's a big county. I think there's a lot of people but parking's not easy down here at this time of night, for sure. I think that's a fact. I don't think it's that easy at all. And that's more of a factor. I mean, parking downtown, I don't know how that got messed up. There's been so many improvements, but the parking situation seems to, coming down here to pay a tax lien, I probably shouldn't say that. I couldn't find parking. I mean, really, it's bad. So I get the element. I have no problem kicking it up, letting someone explore it, and also downsize or improving the county building. I think that's an asset as well if other people could use it. It is a pretty good little event center. But, hey, everyone's entitled to their opinion. Commissioner Midgley feels that way. We'll ask what other commissioners feel, and let it go from there. It's all good. Totally valid points from all sides.
Want to put that in a motion?
Maybe if I could borrow your paper, I'll make a motion.
you have an extra copy?
You didn't get number 2 either?
Well, I don't know what happened. I was really geared up toward the relaxing presentation evening, and all of a sudden there was a lot of motions. You guys put me into reading a lot.
Well, I will
Paragraph.
clarify. So I received an update from my wonderful Mr. Dom over there. I think what happened is we added it on and we sent the revised agenda via email. But if the hard copy is what you brought that you received originally, so I do apologize for that. We'll get it for you, and I would give you my copy, but I have written everywhere. I don't think you will actually read what I'm.
Read that out loud. I'll just read your notes out loud.
You have it electronically? Okay, so we all do things a little differently, but.
And through the chair, if I may, based on the discussion, and I know that we do always make sure that you're aware when items are going to the board, but based on the discussion, we'll ensure that you are aware of when it's scheduled for the board. So if you want to be there at the board hearing, that may add really important points to the board discussion. And so what may have otherwise been a consent item, we'll make sure staff talks to you, and if necessary, puts it on as a discussion item to ensure that that's a meaningful conversation. So we'll carry that forward to Director Kwong and have that, make sure when we're scheduling it that we're considering that.
Oh, I got it. Yeah, I think it's Which part's this? Do I do something with this? Oh, right there. Thank you. Okay, perfect. Got it. I'll use both here. Yeah, I'm curious of if it does get kicked up, it goes to the supervisors eventually, and they may have some opinions that we're not thinking of too. So I mean that's the process. But in the meantime, I'll make a motion for a vote to request that the board.
Chair, I have a question.
Nope. Yes, before the motion, you bet. Thank you.
Yes, I just have a question, Jennifer, if you, reporting to you. Is there a breakdown of where this $110,000 is going? Because it looks like it's happening for Planning Commission and obviously everybody else will use it, but what is the $110,000 really used for? It can't be all going into technology.
Through the chair, if I might. I can only relay the information that I have been provided, which is that was the cost for general services and ISD to work together to get to the same level of service that we have now, which is to be able to stream meetings, have the microphones, allow for the MS Teams participation. So I don't know if we call all of that IT stuff, but I would. And that's what I've been told. I believe that the board report to the board will include a much higher level of degree of specificity as to where things are being spent. I'm sorry, Zoe, I'm not sure what you're...
I do know, I believe it also includes actual physical improvements to the room, including a raised dais, because that was one of the unique issues. Isn't there some actual physical changes?
Not that I'm aware of.
Oh, I thought that was part of the breakdown.
So it would have been great if we had something of a breakdown. I was not provided anything that I can share with you. I can't say yes or no to that one, but I had not been informed of that.
Okay.
Would the supervisors at that time, would they have a breakdown, or would that not be?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So there is a level, and they could be like, well, that looks goofy, or that looks fine.
It was our intention to provide you kind of an estimate and then get some direction as to what the majority of you would like us to do, and then we will put that together, and we can share that with you in advance as well. But yes, there would be a much greater detail provided to the board for a decision like that.
Thank you. And if I may request to the chair that if you can add, the breakdown of the expenses could be in the report, it would be much easier to make a decision.
So you're asking for the breakdown before the commission makes a motion?
Before it goes to the Board of Supervisors.
Oh, before the vote?
Before it goes to the Board of Supervisors, I'm sorry, I'm cutting off a little bit.
Okay. If it's the pleasure of the chair and the commission, we can always bring it back at the next meeting, and
Yeah, I was just thinking,
if I can get that information for
Table
you.
this, and then we'll get a number 2 on ours next month.
Absolutely.
And
Yes.
then we'll hopefully have a full commission here, and we can discuss it and
That's
look at
excellent.
the numbers.
Perfect.
We get
Yes.
a little more. Great, okay, we'll do that. If that's good for everyone, found an agreement? Okay, we'll just table
Thank you.
number 2.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other comments? You want to go over the next meetings? Future hearings.
We have a winery coming up on the 7th of April. It is a new winery. It's located on Davis Road, west of Lodi, south of Peltier Road. We have 2 wineries that we're going to come to you. We thought it would be easier for you to have them on 2 separate meetings. It can get really confusing
Thank you.
for staff as well as the commission and the public. So if we can add a few more things onto these meetings, it'll feel justified. So we'll have the next meeting. I'm going to attempt to get you a housing element update. We are required by state law to provide an update on our regional housing needs on an annual basis. So I am working on that. It's not something I've prepared for yet, so I'm working on that. I'm going to plan on having that at your next meeting, so those will be a few things we can discuss. 1 winery, a housing element update, and the vote on the location. And then this next meeting on the 21st of April will be a separate winery, and that one is actually an existing winery down in the south part of the county on Highway 132. for Mr. Franzia, and he is actually expanding his winery and adding pretty neat project. It's got some bunch of different things. He's got some ag processing, he's got a farm, a new ag store, and then he's making his winery bigger. So this is something I've been talking to him about for like probably 6 years. So I'm actually kind of glad to see this coming to fruition. But that's all we have on the apologize. We actually have a cell tower, which you may be familiar with. It was down in the Ripon area, and it was very contentious when it was going through the review process. And there were a lot of letters written into the board of supervisors about it. Ultimately, staff ended up denying the project. The applicants appealed the project, and we are now finally bringing that to you on appeal. So that will be on the 21st as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we're adjourned. Thank you.